Welcome to the March 19th, 2024 City Council Work Session meeting. Our meetings are public and you're welcome to join us in person or by watching from the Council's agenda page, Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, or SLC TV. We hope you'll continue to join us in whatever manner you feel most comfortable. This is a work session meeting during which there's no public comment. Please be sure to join us on Tuesday, March 26th for our 7 p.m. formal meeting to share your comments. We, of course, welcome your feedback anytime by mail to P.O. Box 145-476, Salt Lake City, Utah, 84114-5476. By email at council.comments@slcgov.com or via our 24-hour phone comment line, 801-535-7654. Comments we receive on agenda topics are shared with council members and posted to our website, slccouncil.com. We'll now begin our work session. The first agenda item is informational updates from the administration. Is Josh Raboyo here? I don't see Josh. I do see Weston and Andrew Johnston. Is that who we're getting? All right. I was promised Josh, and I'm getting a Weston. It's hard to be disappointed with you, but
it is a disappointment. I get it. It's okay.
Could not possibly disappoint if you tried, Weston.
I'm sorry too.
Yeah, he's always the bigger disappointment wherever we go.
His apologies accepted.
All right, I'll be quick so you can get quickly to the more exciting part with Andrew. Of course, we have our first regular slide, which is the next slide there, reminding everybody of the feedback page, encouraging residents to go there. We try to collect all the projects actively going on in the city on that page. I think my mic went away. Is that normal? Is it? No? Hello? Oh, there we go. Maybe it was just too loud. Okay, sorry about that. The feedback page where residents can engage on projects that are currently active in the city, and we try to collect them as best we can. Next page. A couple of quick updates. The planning team is going to have an open house for the draft plan related to the 2100 South Station Area Plan and zoning amendments at the Ballpark Playground, which is 1560 Southwest Temple, on Tuesday, March 26th from 5 to 7. If you can't make that, the same information is available on the project webpage, which you can access through the feedback page I just mentioned. The City Council will be briefed on this draft plan framework on the 26th, and the Planning Commission will be briefed on the 27th. And then the consultant will be finalizing the full draft based on that feedback and start the formal adoption process after that. A couple of new exciting engagements with our public lands team. They are going to be getting ready to launch engagements for Cottonwood Park in District 1 and the Peace Labyrinth in District 2. These projects are funded by the GEO bond, and public engagement will help the city determine what improvements to make to that open space. And you can navigate to those project pages from the feedback page. You can also sign up to be updated as those projects go along, which is a good way to stay in touch. Next page is just the listing of the Mayor's Office Community Outreach Office Hours. And we encourage residents, anyone with questions for the Mayor's Office, to come to any of these throughout the month of April. This year, as we've said before, we're trying something a little new by doing every other month so that we can spend the month before sort of advertising and letting people know. Doing some canvassing and door-to-door work to get people out to chat with the team. So there are our April meetings. And then next week, I hope that we will start back with our summer events, bringing the events that are coming up in the city. As the weather warms, people are getting excited to get outside, and the events are starting up. And that's it.
Any questions for Weston?
They're keeping them for you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. As opposed to Weston's well-paced slides that are easy to read, I have so much information on 2 slides. So the top you'll see going down to the right, still full capacity of the shelters and the winter beds. I will say that we may be coming to the end of the Code Blue period of this winter, but we had extra beds in those Code Blue nights so far this year, so that's been good. There is no encampment impact mitigation work this week due to the county health department having trainings, but the rapid intervention team will be along the Jordan River primarily this week from Three Creeks confluence on the south to Cottonwood Park on the north, and many places in between. You can also see the resource fairs in April at Pioneer Park on Friday the 12th. And then a big announcement for this office, hopefully, and everyone in the public. There is a hygiene kit drive happening right now that the city's helped coordinate. And you can see that from now until March 29th, you can drop off things that are needed at the two locations on the screen, 9 South, 155 East, that's the Maven District, and then 338 West Hanson Ave, which is near 17 South and 3rd West. These will be put together April 2nd at Swanson Unity Center, and they'll benefit the two resource centers in our city. The website at the bottom will give you all the information, the public all the information about how to get involved, what they need, all the details there, so recommend going there. Any questions on this at all? All right, next slide, please. We've had a few questions about what happens now as far as winter overflow, winter shelter, the state legislative session, and the funding there and the plans. We don't have a lot of the details yet because a lot of things are moving very quickly right now. Since the end of the legislative session, the Office of Homelessness Services has been updating their needs because there's some statutory changes to the Utah Homelessness Council, which become the board. They have their funding allocations now, and they have to get everything ready for the next 2 months for the contracts to go out for next fiscal year and figure out what they have and how they can allocate it. So, without that being said, last winter, and I say the State Office of Homeless Services is the top because they're responsible for this. They've taken on this role for making sure we have shelter availability across the state, and a big priority is this county. So, last winter we estimated we needed 600 to 800 beds plus. I'll say the plus in there because it's always hard to tell exactly what the ceiling is on that need. We have added 165 beds at the MVP in Sandy, so that will help. And then we still need additional family shelter above and beyond that number, okay? We anticipate that that's going to be about the need going to next year, even with the Sandy MVP. So that can be a sort of a target for what we need year-round shelter in this county, additional to what we have now. We know what the state received funding for a new low-barrier shelter as part of the allocation. And so what is happening now is Wayne Niederhauser at the state office is looking for land. He's been looking for land for quite a while. He's evaluating public and private parcels. As a city, we've looked at our assets as well, from parking lots to vacant lots to things we're using for other things. We've looked at all that we have to make sure we're not missing something on our end. The key piece here is he's looking for a larger piece of property. So we're talking more than 15 acres. And so it's hard to find us as a city having that much land together that's available to use for this long term. So that's why he's looking everywhere else as well, across the entire region, but probably somewhere in the valley. The other thing that's happening is they're evaluating the state office, the funding scenarios they have. So they have a certain amount of money for next year, and they're evaluating how to use that. That's statewide. And so they'll know exactly what they've got in preparation for the May State Homeless Board meeting, where they'll probably have to take action on the funding for all the folks in the state. The goal is to open as soon as next winter for a new shelter option. And that also means we need interim plans ideally from May until October this year, so we don't have an outflow of folks from existing shelter and then hopefully inflow back to a big one this winter. That would be better than in the past to have a full-time one this next winter, but ideally we don't want that in and out. And then the micro shelter community, the temporary land use resolution, which this council took action on, ends the end of May this year. Therefore, it can't be renewed. It has to end, I believe. And I see Katie Lewis. She'll probably tell me if I'm way off base here. So that shelter cannot operate there after the end of May unless the city takes action in some way. And so we're evaluating our options here, and we'll have to talk more about that as we go forward based on what the state is coming up with for other options. At the bottom of this slide, the state took a lot of responsibility going forward with the governor's budget for shelter services and operations and all. The county is taking responsibility, as they should, for behavioral health needs. So they've released a plan, a 5-year plan that goes through a lot of needs county. It overlaps a lot with homelessness services because there's a lot of housing and services involved that would benefit our systems. They identified a couple of major needs, such as more supportive housing, up to 1,000 units, criminal justice challenges from law enforcement to the jails, et cetera, and then systemic gaps in our treatment operations and availability. I may recommend to you as a council that we could reach out to the county mayor's office, and I bet they would be very happy to come and present this to you. They presented it publicly a couple of times now. It could really help fill in some of the gaps that we have been asking about for a number of years and trying to figure out how we're going to get there. That's a lot of information. I'm willing to take questions now. We can do follow-up discussions as well.
Councilwoman Pui?
I wanted to, first of all, thank you and your team for working this on. I wanted to thank you and your team for staying at the table and working through that legislative session and on all the things that were flying at us and focus on this. And it is humbling to see the state, while not funding fully what it was requested on the governor's budget, to see, they're taking ownership on this issue that is state issue. It is encouraging. I heard some folks tell me, why are you even negotiating with the state? And as if that was an option, right? But this is where it pays out. These are the specific numbers of specific people that are going to be hopefully housed because of your direct involvement in this issue. And I don't think there's going to be enough there's never going to be enough press to highlight the work of so many behind you and in the council staff and many here on the table. There is some kudos to share around. While it's not enough, and it's probably we're going to still have a fight every year. Unfortunately, the funding is very limited. I just wanted to thank everybody and you for pushing the county and the state to take part on this. Obviously, we have some things that we think we could do better too. There is always some room of improvement, but I just wanted to start with that first.
Thank you. Councilwoman Young.
Thank you. So just two comments. One is specific to the upcoming May 24 State Homelessness Board meeting, where they'll be kind of presenting, this is our plan for the funding, as well as the fact that you addressed kind of the county component as well. I'm wondering, as we move into budget season, and I appreciate the timing's difficult, but if it's possible to have that type of ecosystem laid out to help council understand, so our resources related to the city efforts and roles and responsibilities are being complemented by these other efforts at the state and county level. I just think it would help me to understand related to how our resources are helping like that greater effort that comes across partners. So I wanted to make that ask early if possible.
I think that's a good ask, council member. The county is pretty separate in their funding, and their budget cycle is very different as well, obviously, a calendar year. The state will, as they're working through all the options right now, we probably have a very small window of maybe a couple of weeks tops. Yeah. The reason for that is all of the current operators of shelter need to know quickly, because if they need to ramp down operations by the end of April, they need to know very quickly now what's going to happen, or if they need to extend or whatever's going to happen, right? So I think our window is very tight, a couple of weeks. I think we'll have a number of things identified in the next 2 to 3 weeks, I would hope. And then we can get as much information to you early on in this process as possible, so you can make decisions on your end as well. So that'll be our goal as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Andrew, as the money was appropriated, is there flexibility in how it's spent, or was it earmarked both by the state and by the private donors?
There's a number of funding pieces in there. So there is a state component, which I think has some flexibility to my understanding, and Wayne Niederhauser, I think, pushed to make sure he had some ability to move funds around as needed. Some of it was identified as one time versus ongoing, so we can see that some one time was identified for a new shelter option, so that's probably dedicated to that program. There was a $15 million match from Utah Impact Partners to the state allocation. And I think Wayne's office is working with them about the expectations of that money and how it could be used and when. So I don't have that information quite yet. So there may be some restrictions, but I think the intent from everybody was to allow the state flexibility to get the needs met.
And it's safe for us as a city to assume that this micro-shelter community or the low barrier shelter is a priority that will come to pass during this next year with whatever funding is available?
So the micro shelter community as an existing program that's serving 50 people is a priority. We don't want to shut down programs that are working. Now, we know the location may have to change, obviously, but yeah. And that's the same with other programs that are existing right now. We don't want to shut those down. Going forward for a new program like the low barrier shelter, I think that is a high priority from our discussions with the governor's office and internally through the entire session. That was a high priority for everybody to ensure we had more year-round beds and we, as much as we possibly could, not recreate the winter shelter model we've had.
Thank you. All right, thank you both. We are going to move on through our agenda, which is a zoning map amendment at approximately 2760, 2800, 2828 North, 2200 West. Is this the one you're? Okay. All right, we're welcoming to the table Jen Bruno, Nick Norris, Diana Martinez, and John Anderson.
Hi, Madam Chair. I'm just filling in for Nick Tarbett, so apologies if my filling in doesn't cover all of the things. He wanted me to note that there is one outstanding question that it would be helpful for the council to provide some policy clarity for the administration, and that relates to a question of whether or not package and delivery services are strictly prohibited in the area by the development agreement, or if they are allowed as an ancillary or kind of secondary use in the area. That was what we were aware of as the sort of last remaining piece of clarification that the planning staff needed to work on those issues. So with that, I'll turn it over to planning. I don't know if you guys have any follow-up things.
Thank you. Hello. This has been a very long process for these applicants. They've been going through it for a long time. They first went to the Planning Commission in January of last year. They were held up because of the North Point master plan, as you know, small plan. And then they went back to the Planning Commission in December of last year. One of the conditions that you placed as a council on the North Point small area plan was that any proposed zoning map amendment that comes in that is in that transitional area would have to have a development agreement. We have worked, and when I say we, planning staff, city attorney's office, and the city council staff have been trying to work with the applicant to get a development agreement that we all felt was good enough to bring to you. Can I get the next slide, please? Actually, and one more. Thank you. So these are some of these are the main 7 that we have been working with the applicant, trying to make it work for the city and for them as developers. Our understanding was that the first 6 were a done deal, that we had agreed upon that negotiation. The 7th one is a subdivision plat to be recorded for the subject properties. That's a process that we've asked them to make once they come in to develop the property. That was thrown at them a little bit late in the game, and I think they want to talk to you about that. I would like some time to come back to you after they've spoken, because they're going to propose some things to you that I would like to come back as the city to let you know why we want them to stay in that development agreement. So I think at this point we'll just kind of let them have the time to explain what they want of you, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, OCC. Typically, we give applicants 5 minutes.
Can I plug into this HDMI?
I don't know. No.
You guys have it up and
Should
ready?
have him email it to. He has a presentation.
Oh,
Can he
they got
just
it.
plug
We're good.
Oh,
Never mind.
How do I switch slides or?
Verbally prompt.
Verbally? Okay,
All right,
thanks.
thank you. All right, I'll do all this. Here we go. Are we ready to go?
It's all yours.
All right, well, good afternoon, council members. My name is Megan O'Brien. I am here on behalf of the applicant OCC Industrial. And with me tonight are my two business partners, James Carlin and Wilt Channel. And we also have with us Gary Banford, who is one of the property owners. We are here tonight to request a rezone from Ag 2 to M1. You can skip 2 slides. There we go. Our rezone request is for the 14.33 acre parcel shown here. OCC currently has the 2 parcels shown in green under contract for purchase. Of the 12 acres we have under contract, 8 are currently being utilized by a commercial landscaping business, and the other 4 are vacant land. Our plan for the parcel shown in green is to consolidate the 2 lots and develop a Class A light industrial flex building. The triangular parcel, that's 2 acres, that's shown here in red, is owned by Jim and Kathy Larkin, and they will retain ownership of the parcel. Next slide, please. All 3 parcels are identified in the recently adopted North Point Small Area Plan as transitional future land use, which calls for new development within the area to be light industrial. In November, when the plan was approved by City Council directed staff to allow for development agreements while the city works through a new zone for the area. Next slide, please. Now, we understand the sensitivity of developing in this area and the trauma that the existing landowners are going through. We acknowledge that sensitivity and have been working extremely closely with city staff and Councilmember Petro and her team to develop or to move forward with a development agreement that not only honors those who wish to leave the area, but also honor those who wish to stay. So as currently drafted, there are 22 conditions being proposed. We nearly ran out of letters in the alphabet, but all joking aside, these conditions have been extremely well thought out. They incorporate the design standards specifically identified in the North Point plan, but also we have incorporated features that many of you have requested over the past 2 years, including bird-friendly glass, EV-capable parking spaces, a solar-ready building, dark sky lighting, elevated landscaping, on-site retention, and even a food truck pad. And in an effort to cause minimal disturbance to the community through the construction process, we have agreed to limited construction hours and to provide a contact phone number for residents to reach out to if they have any construction-related concerns. Next slide, please. We'd like to thank city staff, Nick Tarbert, who couldn't make it tonight, but and his entire team, and Councilmember Petro for all their help in getting the development agreement to this point. We do have 3 items we'd like you to please consider this evening. The first is we ask that you remove the package delivery facility use restriction. We do not currently have a tenant for this site, and our hesitancy with this restriction is that the tenants are going to be reluctant to sign a lease where there is a use restriction such as package delivery when most industrial users have some sort of delivery component to their operations. Second, we ask that you eliminate the requirement to plant a tree every 30 feet, specifically on the northern and southern property lines of our site. We completely understand and are happy to put in the enhanced screening, landscaping screening, along the adjacent to the existing residential dwellings, which we will provide. Lastly, we'd like you to remove condition T, which requires a subdivision plat. Since we only have 2 parcels, in our discussion with city staff over the years, the plan has been to do a lot consolidation in lieu of a plat. It's a little bit simpler and quicker process for us. Next slide, please. So our site is shown here by the red star. To the north, there is a 126-acre property that is currently under construction or under contract to sell to a industrial development company. To the east is Interstate 215. To the south, the land is currently zoned Ag 2. However, it is identified in the North Point Small Area Plan Future Vision as light industrial. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Council members, do you have questions?
No questions, but the comment about the food truck landing is very excellent. Thanks for following that recommendation.
Look, my neighbors out there have lived in an abject hellscape through the construction. And if they're going to take a risk that someone is going to do what they say and honor as we develop, I want there to be amenities for them. So hopefully this is one that they can enjoy. We did talk pickleball courts at one point too. Okay, I want to can I get a clarification? Can we go back one slide, please? When you are talking about condition A, we are not saying that you want to be able to do exclusively distribution center work. What you're saying is a certain percentage. So the flex space that we're talking about, I think all of us have been familiar with it. It's where there's the front office space, where it's innovation space, administrative space, typical office work kind of things. There's a component of warehouse, which is the manufacturing of some item. We see this with, is it Skull Candy that uses a current facility like this, where there's like an office, then they're making something, and then there's an element where whatever they make has to be taken away, correct? Correct. So what you're saying is a certain percentage to make those things that are being innovated on site, materials have to be brought in, and then at some point, the things that are produced have to be taken away.
Correct.
Do you have any rational concept of what percentage of the business or the building? In my conceptualization, and I'd love other council people's feedback, there are environmental implications that we need to consider. The reason we haven't wanted the truck-served warehouses is because the idling of PM 2.5 and continuous flow of traffic is problematic for the environment. But then the secondary consideration is predictability for the people who live there. One of the things that has been so terrible for them during the construction phase was no one could have prepared any of us for how many industrial trucks would be going up and down that road every day. And so being able to offer some level of predictability to constituents and to people who live out there and say, this is about how many in a day or a week or whatever the calculation is, I think helps us lend clarity to whatever we're going to be putting into a developer agreement, but also helps me take into consideration my neighbors as the world around them changes. So do you have any insight into what a metric could be that would be objective on that?
I think what, in our discussions with city staff, is what the city is interested in limiting is really distribution-focused businesses. And those businesses tend to lease out buildings that have cross dock, so dock doors on both sides of the building. This is a front park rear load. It doesn't lend itself well to that type of use. But in terms of estimating how much distribution component is within this type of building, that's really hard to say. We don't have a tenant identified to date, and so I don't know if you have a better answer, but I really don't have a guess for you.
Councilmember Pui.
Madam Chair, I wonder if the conversation, I mean, I was actually trying to think about how do you draw the line on this to try to incorporate the concerns of the community and your concerns into something that is legally binding, that's not set to interpretation and doesn't create a lot of enforcement from our side or requirement to check on you, or if you are using 35% of your space, like all of this that we don't want to get into it, I don't think. But I wonder if it goes around the type of doors that you put on. There is not docks for trucks. I wonder if there is a way of incorporating in the condition that we eliminate this, but we clarify that what we prefers not to have any loading facility or loading dock gates, the ones that you just mentioned, right? So that if that's something that we could potentially incorporate, I personally prefer not to remove the condition, to be sincere with you. I mean, the whole point of the community and the pushback on the community is to the community wants to be heard about this issue, and they live in there. They live every day. And I want to make sure that and I understand your rationale on this, and this is what I'm trying to figure out, if there is a way of not preventing you from the businesses that are useful for the type of small manufacturing that could create some good paying jobs for our community, but at the same time that you don't become a little mini Amazon warehouse in the middle of a neighborhood. So this is the spectrum of issues that I have, and I will like some feedback on that at some point from probably our city. And the trees, would you give me a little more background on the issue with the trees?
Yeah, so if you look at Exhibit B of the development agreement, which I think is in your packets, the green line indicates where there's going to be a tree required every 15 feet. And then in addition, there's going to be shrubs every 3 feet. And that's where the existing residential dwellings are currently. So that would be screening to the actual residents. Along the north and the south boundary, there's a red line. And that is a tree. They're proposing a tree every 30 feet. However, there are no residential units directly right there. And to the north, that property is currently under contract for sale for industrial development. And to the south, those landowners are also in discussions to do so.
And trees are good beyond. Trees are also good not only for residential units, right? So, I'm also interested in not removing that condition. Trees are good for the environment. They're good on the west side. The administration and the city has a priority of planting a lot of trees on the west side, thousands of them actually, every year as a goal. And the administration has been doing a fantastic job at making that emphasis. I still very interested I still don't understand the concern there.
So as code sits today, if you design this property, there'd be a tree every approximately 70 feet. And so to go to one every 15 is quite a bit more. And the idea, my understanding, was to cluster it around and screen for the existing residents. So that's a little background.
I see what you mean. It's creating basically a wall of trees to help a house. But ultimately, I prefer that we keep the trees. I don't think it will cost a lot of money to keep the trees. But this is my feedback right now, and see if there's anybody else.
Councilmember Dugan, do you have things to say?
I think Councilmember Police said it well. I'm sorry, I appreciate it. Back to the package delivery side of the house. I think that it is a vague thing because everyone's getting packages. We get them all day long at our house. Amazon comes on. Is that allowed or not allowed? So I think there is room for discussion there, but I also need to realize that we don't limit hours here too. This could be a 24-hour operation, and that 24-hour operations, even if you're getting, I'm going to call them bread trucks, down your street every day, that's going to be noisy. And so even if it's 10 an hour, that's very low in manufacturing. Well, that could be very low in distribution, but that could also be heavy on the roads. So I think that it does need some more discussion and more probably clarity on it in that discussion, because what does that, how do we want to define that? But I think I love the discussion we have here. I think it's just a future discussion with the city and the
some sort of metric that can qualify it better. Councilmember Mano, did you have something to add?
I guess I was just trying to think through the question that was raised before of like, how do we, if it's our goal, which it sounds like it's our goal, to limit like true distribution logistics facilities, but allow small manufacturing and the package delivery and shipping that would be required for those types of uses. I was just trying to brainstorm. I don't know if it's a percentage of the square footage that is used, or if maybe there's time and use restrictions, like you can only do deliveries between this time and this time of day and no more than X number of trucks a day. I don't know if that's legal, if that's possible to monitor. Or it's just the way that the business, if there's a business license way to do it, that like these types of businesses are allowed and these types are not. Those are the three things that I could think of. And then in regards to the tree, I agree that trees, especially for uses that could create more truck traffic, will reduce carbon and reduce pollution in the air. So I would say to be potentially flexible along the northern and southern property lines of like, maybe it's not one every X number of feet, but that number of trees is put somewhere. And if you want to put them all in like a grove of trees that could be like a place where your workers can go eat lunch or something, I would be open to some flexibility in exactly where the tree goes, but just less trees is maybe less compelling to me. I don't know if that helps or not.
If we don't have any other specific questions for the developers, I'll ask city staff to come back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, John. Thank you for the opportunity to come back. We do have some explanations for a few of those things. I'm going to let John cover the first part.
I think the first part is related to the use. It doesn't mean that you couldn't ship packages at all. It just means it can't be your primary use of your business. So for example, if you had the primary use of your business was industrial assembly, you take parts, you put things together, then you ship them out. The use isn't package delivery. At that point, it's industrial assembly. And so I think the issue has been, we don't want whole buildings that's all that they are doing.
Is there a way for us to generate, and is it legal? Maybe that's our Katie question, for us to generate some sort of metric that could provide us enforcement capabilities later or protections for the constituents who live out there?
Well, I think it would be based on how are they licensed. Because if your license is light manufacturing, we wouldn't necessarily say normally that your shipping is an accessory use, but it would just mean that it would have to be not the primary use, if that makes sense. So like the primary use is we build things, we make things. We obviously have to ship them, because if not, we would end up with a lot of things that are just sitting there. So I don't think I could come up with an exact metric. That's hard because every building is and different use is kind of unique. But when they came in to get a business license, and if we say that this use is not allowed as a primary use, then that would be the first place we would catch it. Enforcement after that, I couldn't quote what the difficulties might be. But.
Let me clarify this, Madam Chair. So the draft ordinance as it is right now will allow for that light manufacturing and this office hybrid as it is right now, as it's presented by your staff. It would allow what the.
Are you saying the development agreement?
Yes.
No. We've asked that be prohibited. Package delivery facility would be prohibited.
Right, as the primary use.
As the primary use,
But
correct.
you could have other uses like they spoke with, and if it makes it more clear to add a sentence that says other uses that may
Yeah, it sounds
have
like even
this as
within
an
us-
accessory use, that might be
Yeah, it sounds
helpful
like
to
even within
clarify.
just us, there's a lack of clarity as we're discussing it.
Yeah.
So I really would appreciate us going a little deeper on that and offering some clarity.
Yeah, I think it might be useful for the applicant, certainly for us to understand a little better. But yeah, I certainly I understand where they come from, and and good paying jobs that have little teeny manufacturing job component to the whole equation is not something that I was intended to stop. Certainly the warehouse full of boxes coming and going all day long is the intended use that I didn't want to happen in there, or the use that I didn't want to happen in there. So on that issue, on the trees, I like the idea from Manu. I don't know if there is any thoughts on that.
So going back to the trees, you just, as a council, you have just approved and adopted the landscaping ordinance that just went through recently. We initially, when we came to the developer, to OCC Industrial, we had asked them for one every 15. And that would basically be the buffer between the residential and the commercial, if you will, industrial use. We don't know what those uses are going to be to the north and the south. Right now, it's open agricultural land, so we're not quite sure what will be placed there. So we thought we were okay, and we had negotiated one every 30, which we feel is, gives both sides, it's a good call. I don't think that we should drop that. I think, not knowing those uses that are going to come in, being on the west side, having the opportunity to have trees, I think that we felt like that was a really good negotiation with them.
We can have reasonable assurance, though, that it won't be non-agricultural residential based on the FAA overlay.
That is likely, yes.
Right.
But we started this conversation, apparently you guys started the conversation with a higher requirement, dropped to a lower one, and now the applicant is asking us to remove it completely, and
Do we have a problem with the clustering that Councilmember Mano suggested? Or is there a problem with doing an aggregate number and then allowing it distributed throughout the property?
I mean, we could work with them. I mean, we could just get some language put together. I mean, I think that we could easily find what's the lot width, what's the frontage, how many trees should you have, and we could come up with those numbers.
I find myself more connected to not losing the number of trees for the environmental purposes more than I'm committed to the placement of them so much. Do you? Come on, Councilmember
Except
Dugan,
for where it is
challenge me on this.
screening, Madam Chair, I think the placement is important where it is screening between residential
Right,
and commercial.
right.
But in the other boundaries, I feel less compelled to the location.
I'd like to see it, but I agree. You still are trying to.
Mike.
You're still trying to build a natural barrier there. And so there would be placement there. You would want to cluster all the trees in one area. But as you get closer to the east side where the canal is, maybe you don't need as many trees there because you have the canal side of the house. So there could be, every 30 feet, it kind of be too rigid there. But there should be a good line of trees across both sides, north to south.
Councilmember Wharton.
So is there just having the 30-foot requirement and having it be on the property line like normal, like this may be what your last question was, but to ask it in like a more pointed way, what are the potential downsides of not just having that requirement for the property that's not developed yet?
That residential comes in.
Okay.
And then you don't have a proper buffer.
And the likelihood of that happening, though, is low, you're saying?
Right, we'd have to remove the air flight path overlay or modify it to allow for that, which the council has when those former hotels down off 2200 West and North Temple. So it's not.
That's the only time.
Right, you're
and
absolutely
that was
right.
A pretty specific reason.
Yeah, it is. You're very right. It's a very low chance that it would be. But.
Okay, and are there any other potential
The other limiting factor is the cost of the land out there. Residential, from every developer who's been out there, is not penciling, except in a high density, which would not be achievable by the zoning permissions.
Guess what? Something that I'm imagining which is probably not, I don't even know if it's real, but let's say that they all have to be on the lot line, and then something comes in later, and in order to build it, they have to take out a bunch of the trees, and it would have been better if they had more flexibility on where to put the trees.
I think that at that point that we would want to work with them further and make sure that it could work, because under a development agreement, if we have them put the trees in, take the trees out, they have to be replaced.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to take more negotiation then on our part or on yours. So it could totally be your call.
And my second is, can you take us through the other requests that they're...
The plat versus the...
Oh, yeah, I think that's the final.
That's the only other
we
one we
wanted
haven't
to talk
discussed.
about.
There are only 3?
The last one is the subdivision plan that they wanted to
For some
take
reason I
out.
thought there were 4. Okay,
Do you
so
want
can you
me
tell
to
us
skip
about
to that?
Yeah.
So that one is imperative. That shouldn't be taken out. 2200 West is not a dedicated road. A subdivision plat would give us that dedication, the city. Also, that calls for sidewalk and road improvements. It's imperative. It's got to be there.
Yeah, and those are done through the subdivision improvement plats, which are accompanying the final plat approval.
And that process is not a long process. The applicant is going to go through, an extensive process through the building permit process anyway, so they can do it concurrent with that. It shouldn't hold
Is that
them
through the
up.
county?
No,
plat?
that would be through
That's through us
us,
as
through
well?
the city, yeah.
I wish I were better versed in this. I was unprepared for plats and consolidations.
What?
Councilmember Mono, since you have the most subject matter expert professionally on this.
I think I'm a little bit unclear on that, but a subdivision plat is a city process.
Yes.
Correct.
That's a thing that we've defined what subdivision plat mean. It's
Correct.
not like,
The process and the application is through us. It would be recorded with Salt Lake County,
and
but
that,
the process goes
but
through
through
us.
that process, the public right of way gets dedicated
To us,
to us.
to the city.
So it doesn't necessarily mean they're taking their proproperties and splitting them into a bunch of little properties.
Nope.
They could be consolidating their properties.
Correct, and they
but
would be.
still doing a subdivision
Yes.
process,
Correct.
plat process through the city, which would do the road dedication.
Correct.
Okay, so I think that it's probably semantics that the applicant is saying we're actually combining, so we don't need to do a subdivision, because the word subdivision to me could
Right.
also mean we're taking a large parcel and cutting it into a bunch of little ones.
Right.
But we're saying a different thing. So it's the same word, but it's two different meanings.
Exactly. The subdivision part is a little,
I think it's a misleading word.
it is a misleading word,
The
yes.
city process
Right.
that allows us to record it and get the public right of way
Dedication,
dedicated
correct.
and improved.
Yes.
Okay, so in that case, I think it's a semantics issue.
Okay.
And I sounds like I would agree with staff that we keep that and just clarify that it's not, that process still allows them to consolidate parcels into one, not.
Correct.
They don't have to split them into more parcels through that.
And to add to that, like I mentioned earlier, we threw that at them kind of late in the game on the DA. So, staff is willing to go back and explain that process to them, that it should not be a holdup, but it is imperative that the city does it to get road dedication.
Okay, so I'm hearing that they can do light manufacturing, they can ship packages, get deliveries, it just can't be their primary use, which seems to be in alignment with what we're saying, so we just need to clarify that the language in the development here allows for that.
Yeah, I think it's as easy as discussing just the difference between a primary use and an accessory use, so.
Okay, and then,
Councilwoman Young?
I just want to support keeping the last condition related to the plat piece. I have a lovely road that no one will claim because it wasn't documented, and there's a lot of frustration, from folks who use that road, whether it's for business and or for residential, that no one seems to have to be responsible for it, and I would hate to do that to another community.
Thanks.
And the property to the west went under that same process. So we're being consistent in doing that. I would ask one thing on the second condition that they're asking about the trees. I do think that we need more direction from you of how to go back to the applicant and deal with that.
So council, we don't vote, but would you all please indicate, are we going to stick rigidly to the number and the placement? Is the number the most important thing, or we don't care about the tree condition?
I think we need to clarify that the placement where it's not buffering between houses, right?
Correct. We're just going to talk about the northern and the southern.
Yeah.
The buffering against residential is not up for debate. They've committed to that. So we're just talking about the northern and southern boundaries.
For me, priority number one would be to maintain the amount of trees that to me is
so
non-negotiable.
Amount, location?
yes, amount.
Amount?
Amount.
Well, it's a majority of us. I think we care more about the number of trees than the placement of the trees.
Okay.
Okay.
So if we modified that 30 feet, every 30 feet, we're good. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Is that all that you need from us?
No, thank
Okay.
you for your time.
It's been very helpful. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. All right. Oh, we're so far behind. This is stressing me out. Okay. So we're now going to move on to the rezone and master plan amendment at 1791 South, 1815 South State Street, and 118 East and 120 East Coatesville Avenue. We're going to have Brian Fulmer, Trevor Ovenden, or is it Ovenden or Ovenden? All right. And Wayne Mills here.
Madam Chair, I need to recuse myself from this item.
You know when you can come back?
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, council.
Okay, let's get started. Okay, so this is a zoning map and general plan amendment request for 4 properties located approximately 1815 South State. And change slide, please. So the applicant is requesting to change the zoning designation of the properties from R15000 single-family residential and CC corridor commercial to RMU residential mixed use to facilitate the development of a mixed-use project at this site. The applicant is also requesting to change the future land use designation of these properties from the Central Community Master Plan to high-density mixed use to support the rezone request. Change slide again. So here are a few photos of the site. On the right is an existing warehouse or furniture building that's been there for a while. It's vacant, and it will be required to be repurposed with this project. The pictures on the left are just what the site looks like now. There were 2 single-family homes and a restaurant that were demolished last year to allow for redevelopment at this site. Change slide again. So zoning's pretty consistent with the land use in the area, with mostly single-family homes to the east and small-scale commercial uses to the north and south. The BP zoning to the west is the OC Tanner campus. Change slide. So I'll talk about a few differences between RMU and the existing R15000 and CC zones. So these aren't all the differences, just a few I'm going to highlight. So building heights, the big one. So the proposed RMU zone allows multifamily buildings up to 75 feet tall without any special approval process, while the existing CC zone limits building to 45 feet through the design review process, and R15000 limits buildings to 28 feet. Staff is recommending conditions to address impacts related to building height. And then parking is another thing to talk about. There's no minimum parking requirement in RMU. The current zoning designations require between 1 and 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit. The applicant has stated that they intend to build approximately 190 off-street parking spaces. And then lastly, there are no front or side yard setbacks required in RMU. Only a rear yard setback of 25% of the lot depth or 30 feet, whichever is less. And change slide again. So this is just a few examples of what's been built under the RMU designation in other areas of the city. And we can just hang out here for a second or two. And now we can change the slide. Okay, so now I'll briefly talk about how this proposal complies with our general plans. So the central community plan is the neighborhood plan applicable to the site, and the plan does not generally support increases in density outside of downtown. However, citywide goals for more modern plans like Housing SLC and Plan Salt Lake acknowledge the current housing shortage and are intended to increase the amount of housing in the city overall. Some of these plans specifically call for additional density and mixed use near major transportation corridors like State Street. While the proposal is not entirely consistent with the central community plan, staff has found that other citywide goals and objectives for more modern plans justify the proposed general plan and zoning map amendment. Staff has found that development under the RMU zoning regulations can be made compatible with existing development with several conditions. Change slide. And here are those conditions. So the first one would require a 30-foot rear yard setback from the eastern boundary of the site, regardless of building orientation of future development. Change slide. So the second condition would impose a 1-to-1 step back requirement in addition to the 30-foot setback requirement, as shown on this diagram. Each additional foot of building height above 30 feet would be required to be stepped back an additional foot from the east property line. This would limit buildings to 60 feet at the 30-foot setback line and only applies to the portion of a building that is located between 30 and 45 feet from the single-family zone to the east. Change slide. The third condition would require a 10-foot wide landscape buffer along the eastern boundary of the site, which would need to include a solid 6-foot tall fence, a continuous shrub hedge at least 4 feet tall, and at least 1 shade tree every 30 linear feet. Change slide. The fourth condition would require that the existing building at 1815 South State Street is repurposed with redevelopment of the site. The applicant's proposal includes an adaptive reuse component that would repurpose this building for commercial use. This condition ensures that this building will be repurposed if the property is sold after the amendment is approved or if development plans change. Change slide. And the fifth and final condition clarifies that these conditions apply only when the abutting properties are zoned single-family residential. If the properties to the east were ever rezoned to a zoning designation that allows buildings greater than 35 feet tall, these conditions would no longer apply to development on this site. Change slide. A public hearing was held with the Planning Commission on May 10th, 2023. There were 3 in-person commenters who voiced concerns about the height allowed by OU. We also received 4 emailed comments. 2 were in opposition, 2 were in support, and we also received a letter from the Liberty Wells Community Council supporting the request. The Planning Commission voted unanimously to forward a positive recommendation to the City Council. And that is it for my presentation.
Thank you very much. Council members, any questions for staff before we move on? All right, is the developer here?
Yes.
Petitioner? All right. Do you have a presentation or are you just chatting with us? Okay. We give petitioners 5 minutes, so. And make sure you pull that microphone nice and close.
All right, so I'm Brian Scott with Uncommon Architects here to represent us. And I think that planning gives a good kind of overview of the zoning questions and technicalities. So I just want to give you a quick kind of rundown of the history and what's brought us to where we are. So Maven and Colmena are the 2 developers who've partnered on this. And they partnered on it in large because of 2 shared kind of ideals. One is adaptive reuse, which Maven does a lot of and is very good at. And the second is the brings life back to State Street. And so throughout this whole kind of process, those have been kind of our guiding lights and what have led us to where we are. So we started with wanting to keep that building on the corner. We're very passionate about adaptive reuse, and so everything else kind of comes out of that, out of what we can add to the site and what we can build around it, and that gives us kind of our building shape and everything. Throughout this, we've gotten a lot of really good community support and a lot of excitement. As you see on that site, it's a very kind of barren place at the moment, and I think in the RDA study that came out a while ago, it was either the number 1 or number 2 block that people wanted something to happen there. And so we've gotten a lot of positive comments about that. The one concern that did come up is obviously about the building height in proximity to single-family residential. And so we spent a lot of time kind of working with planning staff, going back and forth on how far we should push our building away, what kind of step backs we should do, doing solar studies and shadow studies to try and mitigate any negative impact to the neighbors, because we want this to be, a great project for everyone. And after we came out of, we originally went through Planning Commission a while back, maybe 12 months or something like that. And we kind of paused as we came out of Planning Commission just because of the kind of shifting financial landscape to make sure that this was a project we could do and we could deliver on what we were looking for. And so since then, we've kind of been working on kind of honing our floor plans and units and everything so that we can make a project where we actually can deliver on that and, reuse that building and turn it into a really cool hub for the community. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen, who's here from Maven, to tell a little bit about what they do.
Hi, I'm Jen Anvichin. I'm with the Maven District. And I just wanted to take a quick moment to share a little bit about Maven and why we're so interested in expanding our footprint to State Street. The Maven District is a development that sits on 900 South between 200 East and State. It's home to over 70 locally owned small businesses, which about 75% of them are women-owned. And over the last 7 years, we've spent our time trying to transform that little pocket of 900 South to find homes for underrepresented entrepreneurs, diverse founders, and creatives. And we know that our success isn't solely based on occupancy. It's really rooted in our mission to remaining agile to the pulse of the neighborhoods that we build in, listening to the needs of the community, and embracing collaboration over competition. Now, we hope to be able to expand that community-driven ecosystem to Maven State, and we're really excited by this, and our current tenants are excited for the opportunity to be able to expand their current businesses and in turn provide new homes for up-and-coming entrepreneurs. We know that community and economic development isn't limited to physical buildings, which is why we don't view this project as just another development project. This is a long-term investment in into a neighborhood that we love. We consider State Street to be part of the heartbeat of Salt Lake, and we at Maven and Colmena really look forward to bringing a vibrant business district to State. Thank you.
Thank you. Council members, any questions for the petitioners? Yes, Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the presentation and I agree with the development agreement and the setbacks, and I really like the idea of the setback and then the step back. So that's very nice. On the housing side of the house, you talked a little bit about mixed income, and you have up to a couple 3-bedroom sites. Could you give us a little more details on the mixed use or the mixed income on the housing?
So part of part of what we've been doing is trying to make the project, pencil, and that's why we hit pause. And I don't know that currently that's something we really want to do. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do the larger units now. We went to a couple more studios. So yeah, I'm not positive.
But are you still planning on mixed income? Besides, maybe just stop at the 2-bedroom, but are you still mixed income, or is it all going to be market rate? Just like,
I'm not sure. That's again, we can't. We want to do mixed income. I'm not sure what level of it we can commit to, though, and so that's been a big argument, kind of, that we're trying to work out. So
the next on top of that question would be we just passed the Affordable Housing Initiative, and I'm not sure how that impacts this. If you were to get an extra 12 feet, how that works with the affordable housing. And have you looked into that at all?
No, we haven't looked into that yet, but that's part of what we're looking into right now, is whether or not that will allow us to bring that back, because we'd love to.
Okay.
Well, Madam Chair, I have a quick question. I'm a little confused about, is there any commercial uses on the ground level plan for this? Because I couldn't find it on the...
Yeah, so the existing building will be all commercial use on the ground level, and then the new building will be commercial use all along State Street.
So when I was looking at that chart that says the 1815 South and 1791 South, those are not going to be demolished, right? This is demo house now. Is that what that is?
Sorry.
Are you demolishing those structures on State Street? You're going to demolish them or not?
There was a small, I think it was a hot pot restaurant that was demolished, and then the 2 residences behind.
Oh, so okay. Let me clarify for my own sake, not what you're saying. So there's going to be a new structure facing State Street, and that will include commercial.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That makes me very happy. And is it clear from how much commercial you're going to have on that ground level?
Along State Street, where we plan to have that all be commercial. So.
Okay, that makes me very happy. And we've been pushing other projects on the same street, not very far from that, to make sure that they look at the bigger picture of State Street. So that makes me happy that you're mixing uses on that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
We'll move on then to the legislative action regarding the Sugar House Business District zoning amendments and the transfer of development rights program. Councilmember Lopez Chavez, would you mind just screaming in there that he can come back? Thanks, Councilmember Dugan. All right, so Brian, are you filling in for Nick on this one too?
I'm pinch hitting for Nick on this one.
All right. And then we've got Michaela and Wayne with us as well.
Yes. This legislative action is requesting that the administration undertake research and draft an ordinance to establish a transfer of development rights, or TDR, program specifically tailored for the Sugar House business districts. This program is designed to foster urban growth while safeguarding historical and cultural assets. If the council supports this legislative action, it will be formally adopted in a later formal council meeting. I will turn it over to Michaela and Wayne.
Talking about transfer of development rights and what that is. Commonly, we'll refer to it as establishing a TDR program, which we've been talking about for a long time. And where that TDR program would live, if we were to establish that, would be in the zoning ordinance, where potentially we would set up some sort of overlay or boundary area and work with the council, and essentially set up senders. Maybe that's a historic building, maybe that's a parcel that's not able to be developed for whatever reason, but allow them a mechanism to sell some of their development right to a receiver within that boundary area that may be able to utilize an underdeveloped property or portion of their property. Like I said, it could be landmark buildings, parcels that that have some serious development constraints, or perhaps just some of those special iconic buildings that we have in the Sugar House area that the community cares so much about. And any other questions?
Would the TDR program only apply to the Sugar House Business District, or is it something that we could apply throughout the city?
I think if we wanted to start with Sugar House, that would be a smaller area.
I'm actually not really interested, because if we're going to do it for Sugar House, there are other places in the city that are experiencing these pressures, and there are things that should be preserved. I mean, we just had the briefing on Japantown, and it's actually a pretty remarkable opportunity to, preserve the Japanese churches there. So I would be interested in a more expansive view of this, with thanks to Sugar House for being an impetus for us getting it going.
Yeah, so definitely not opposed to other community and kind of aspects there. I think one of the things was, because this would be a new tool, that it might be useful to kind of proof of concept it, and not necessarily from an exclusivity side of it, but that was just the original kind of design related to seeing kind of what the pros and cons could be, but certainly open to seeing if there's other areas that it would make sense.
TDRs are pretty common tools in other places though, right? Is this something that we're innovating, or is this something that we're importing a best practice from somewhere else and just customizing it to our landscape?
We're allowed under state law, Utah state law, to customize to our landscape. I think it's run the gamut on municipalities. Sometimes it's preserving agricultural land. Sometimes it just depends on the goal of the electeds or the goal of the TDR program.
I see this potentially having benefits in Great Salt Lake conversations and a lot of different things. I'm open to being checked by my fellow council members, but I would like to see this expanded as rapidly as possible throughout the city.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm really excited about this and using this as a tool, as transfer of development rights is not a tool for cities that aren't growing, and we are a city that is growing and there's development pressure, and I think this allows us to harness some of that development pressure for other community goods, such as preservation of lower scale historic buildings, etc. My one thought about whether it gets in the city where it would be useful, I would like the tool though to be have the sending and receiving zones to have to be in proximity with each other, because I don't know that preserving a single story business over on North Temple in order to get more height in Sugar House really is getting the goal. It's within that neighborhood we want to preserve both some smaller buildings. If we're going to allow a taller building, let's preserve some smaller buildings in the process, but they should be in the same proximity. So expanding the program, yes, but not expanding that you can transfer from one district all the way to the district on the other side of the city.
Does that indicate that there's a difference in a TDR for natural things. So if we're preserving something around the Great Salt Lake or around the Jordan River or something like that, then it would make sense that those development rights would need to go further away. Is that a different caveat? Order, please. There is no public comment during this. There's no public comment. There is no public comment. CBI, can you please help
Could we
us?
please have security?
Security, please help us.
During this meeting,
We'll be in recess for 5 minutes. Thank you. We have a quorum and we're back. We will return to the issues of city business, which is our statutory responsibility. All right, can we continue with the discussion of TDRs? Councilmember Dugan.
Yes, thank you. I have two questions. One would be, what is the negative of doing these TDRs? But before you get to the negative, could you give a little more of an explanation, an example of a TDR, especially if you're talking about a historic building and transferring height, and kind of expand on the definition of that for us not as well informed members?
I think it could be height. It could be any sort of development right, is my understanding. And I think as part of our research, we'd want to learn from you what your main goal was, which I think we understand, and put together some sort of formula that reflects that goal in this TDR program.
Councilwoman Young.
Yeah, so I think to build on that, one of the impetus for, making this request and moving forward with what it could look like is really trying to shift from a position of reactive to being proactive. And I think that to me is one of the opportunities and why I would like to explore it in terms of we react to so many requests here. And I know that there are other efforts happening at the city to help to streamline that, and I'm really excited about what that's going to look like. This is just another action to try and say, what could we do from a policy standpoint that allows us to be proactive about, letting the city know, the developers, the residents know, this is what we would like to see and expect to see in terms of future efforts, preservation, development, inclusive, for that kind of balance build.
So I think for me, I would like to see, I don't want to do anything that slows down. I know there's a matter of great urgency in Sugar House to get this. So I know that we've kind of blown this up to something that could take a considerable amount of time, especially if we're considering not just building height and proximity, but then considering natural implications as well. So is it possible to do a staged TDR program where the first stage would be something directly responsive to Sugar House, but maybe not geographically restricted to Sugar House, and then add in the natural once we've solidified that?
So it's one thing to do a TDR program in one zoning district within that district. That really isn't all that complicated. It becomes much more complicated when we're mixing in different zoning districts, because that transfer has to be economically viable. It also means that, to some degree, any receiving area has to have a demand for development that exceeds what the zoning already allows. So those things would all have to be figured out. It becomes pretty complicated to do that, and frankly, we would probably have to have some sort of an economic analysis and study done of something, which means there'd be a specific budget allocation for something like that. The other piece of it is there can be a administrative cost to managing that program, because you have to manage those rights that have been transferred. Anytime that property comes in for a building permit or anything else, there's that additional thing. So you manage what's called a TDR bank, where deposits are put in and development rights are pulled out as withdrawals.
So when you say within one zone, the policy would be if it's all CBD, any transfers of development rights within a CBD zone is the same. Anything within an M1 is the same. Is that what you're saying? Or do you have to customize it for each?
No, so you can do either.
Okay.
When it's customized and it allows transfers from one zone to another, it becomes more complex. So for example, in Sugar House, let's take the old post office building, which is a local landmark site that has unrealized development potential of probably 100 building feet, right? They may be able to, that owner, because they are landmarked, may be able to sell that development potential to somebody else who could apply it to somewhere else in the Sugar House Business District. So that's how it would essentially work. There's the possibility for it to work even on the same property if that property has some historic or older buildings they want to preserve, and in exchange build on like a portion of their property that's a surface parking lot, but then go higher.
So then our goal today is to establish a legislative intent around this. Is that correct? Would it be fair to offer staff the guidance that we are interested in a legislative intent that deals with building height and density within same zones to be applied across the city, which I think would satisfy what you need in Sugar House?
Can I ask an additional question related to that? I'm looking at the Sugar House zoning map, and we have Central Sugar House Business District 1 and 2. Could it cross like similar and adjacent zones where a property that's very close to one zone and it is in a similar but like slightly lower density zone? Or does that just automatically jump it into that level of complexity that
it makes it more complex?
More complex, okay.
But I mean, it certainly is possible.
And then that we have some zones that pop up all over the city. So I would also want some if we're saying it has to be in the same zone, it has I think we also need to say it needs to be within X number of
So
miles.
within zones and a geographical proximity.
I think so, because like if it's say we're doing it within R1 zones, those are all over the city, right? And I don't think that wouldn't want to allow development rights to be transferred from one R1 zone on the west side where land values are way, way different than an R1 zone on the east side where land values are way higher, and allow them to build, I think that it needs to be geographically limited as well. And then I'm adding more complication, and this can be like we do this later when we figured out the first tool. But when we talk about the formula, I would be interested in like if it's a historically contributing structure, maybe the transfer is worth a higher value, or like certain things that would allow us to put community goals within that program. And I think I get that that's way more complicated.
Yeah, because that
Getting
comes
from
down
your
to
face that's really complicated, but
comes down to that economic need, right?
Yeah.
Because it has to be economically viable to do it, and that receiving area has to be able to accept it. So if you have an area right now that allows like 75 feet of building height, somebody probably isn't going to transfer 50 feet to there because the construction type isn't going to be economically viable.
Yeah.
So that's where it becomes really challenging to try to do something like that. Even, frankly, if we just looked at like our commercial and downtown zones, it's going to be really challenging because most of those zones already are kind of at the top end of what's economically viable in them right now.
Could there be a tool that's more flexible? Like this is a process, but like you come and say this is the agreement that we want to do, and then that has to be like a council approval as a rezone or something. Like I don't know if there's a way that we could say that we don't define all those things for now, but just say you come tell us what would work in this case, and we can look at it in this specific case and then use that to then inform a larger zoning.
I think that's the current zoning map amendment process, because anyone can come in and propose a zone that would accomplish that.
They can bring a zoning map buddy.
Yeah, the goal for this though is that if I mean we can name the elephant in the room, right?
So, well, because it's greater, like it's the entire area, like that is facing these pressures. And again, I think we're trying to have a conversation about what policy tools make sense to engage the community in that proactive response.
I think it's also worth pointing out that it's in our shared best interest to go higher as we can for water purposes, for density purposes, because we have mountains that are blocking us in and sprawl is done. But how do we do that while preserving those other things that add character to our neighborhoods, those other places that we don't want to lose, that add culture or are just landmarks for those of us who have lived here? And so I think like we actually need it. It's not just being responsive to developers, but we know we have to go higher. How do we do that while honoring these spaces and preserving them in meaningful ways?
Yeah, so I guess back to the proposal about the expansion. So I guess I'm leaning more towards the earlier suggestion of the tiered approach in terms of, is it possible to be able to say, you know, what is possible here in the Sugar House area, and then based on what comes back, because we're still in that early phase of the conversation of what does that look like, and then use that as the platform for then the future direction of where we want to go more comprehensively.
Can we all, is that a place that we can all land at? I would appreciate something that is as basic as it can get, that offers us quick leverage to start implementing it, with an intention that we flesh out the program more fully with the economic implications and all that you mentioned as we get it more under our feet. Should we show our feelings on that? Someone want to propose a straw poll around that?
Madam Chair, I'll propose a straw poll that we approve a legislative intent that would ask planning staff to work on transfer of development rights tool with the intent that it starts as simple as possible to be implemented in Sugar House, but then at a future stage we could look at expansion.
Show your feelings. All right, that is a unanimous approval from a straw poll. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, we will move on to item number 5, the library budget amendment number 2 for fiscal year 23-24. Ben Ludke is going to join us at the table with Mary Beth Thompson, as well as Debbie Ehrman, Noah Baskett, and Tyler Barr from the library.
The budget amendment before the council has a single item adding $1.3 million of additional funding for the main library roof renovation project. It's coming to the council in a mid-year budget amendment because waiting for the annual budget could cause a work stoppage and further increase costs for the project. It is scheduled to be completed in the summer or fall later this year. There are two sources for the $1.3 million of additional funding. There's $157,000 of reappropriated funds from other capital projects and $1.1 million from the library's fund balance. This would reduce the library's fund balance to 15%, which is about $4.3 million. That is slightly below the 16% minimum target for the library's fund balance, which is equivalent to about 2 months of their operating expenses. The $1.3 million of additional funding would bring the total project cost to $8.7 million. This project has had appropriations approved by the council over 3 fiscal years. And that's a combination of cost increases related to the pandemic and inflation, as well as recognizing that the cost of the project is just greater than the library's capital budget can cover in a single fiscal year. I'll turn it over to Noah and his team, who have a presentation with more.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you, Council. We thank you for the opportunity to brief you all on the status of roof renovations at Maine and to present, as Ben said, Budget Amendment number 2 for your consideration. We are really proud of this community asset, along with all of our library locations. And next slide, please. A number of you all have had a chance to tour roof construction with us today, last week, and a couple of you all were hosting tomorrow, where you've had the chance to look at some of this work that's being done firsthand, really with our goal of making the roof accessible to the community at large. This rendering right here is what the roof will look like after completion of the work in the coming months. And as construction has progressed on the roof, a number of items have risen as critical priorities due to material cost inflation, as well as existing conditions that we simply didn't know about until demolition of the roof began. So as Ben said, in order to allow our contractor to order materials necessary to continue the work, as well as to avoid any work stoppages, the library does recommend an approval of additional funding for the project to come from the library's general fund balance, as well as existing capital project fund designations. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tyler Barr, our Director of Finance, to walk you through the details of this amendment proposal.
Great. Thank you, Noah. Next slide, please. So the original budget for this fiscal year included $7.3 million for roof renovation and work that has been completed or authorized to this point will use up the approved budget. So in January, the Library Board of Directors approved this proposal that's before you today. The proposed amendment includes funding for a glass wall, which you see depicted on the left of this image. And that will provide guests a quite inspiring view of the south part of the valley from the library, as well as some metal railings. And both of these elements are essential to reopen the roof to public access safely. Next slide, please. Our request also includes funding for landscaping, some of which you see depicted in this image, and a small amount that is needed for site furnishings. Next slide, please. So here are the specific costs for each of these elements. Landscaping and irrigation at $280,500. Glazing and that glass wall, $305,000. The metal railing and paint, $300,000, and site furnishings at $25,000. Next slide, please. In addition, our request includes the contractor's costs that are outlined in the packet, in the memo that was included in your packet. So the remaining $280,000 then will be reserved as owner's contingency, which along with the $97,000 that was approved previously by the board, will ensure that these budget amendments will be the final budget amendments for this portion of the roof project over the Triangle building. Next slide, please. As Ben pointed out, some of the funding for this request.
What do you mean by this portion?
I'm glad you asked. There are other elements that require attention, including the crescent wall portion. So as folks look over from the roof, there's the crescent wall that has been accessible to walk up. That is not included in this project.
Okay. And when will we get that?
So the estimate that we have for the waterproofing that's necessary to be able to open that to the public, it's the same issue that we had with roof construction on the main of the waterproofing failing. The estimate we have is about $1.5 million. Currently, we do not have that in the budget for fiscal year 25. We do have that in our planned contingency funding for next year, but it's a big concern of ours. We know it's a great desire of the community. We would love to open the crescent wall yesterday. Currently, we do not have the funds to be able to open it.
Okay, and why should we not scale back some of the things on the project? Do you think?
I'm sorry, scale back the...
is this what's on the previous slide? It seemed like there are some things that may be more critical than others. Do you think that it's better to get the structural things in place now on that, and maybe on the maybe this is too ambitious on the crescent wall, and then add in the more the less critical things as time goes on? Or is it more economic? Why are you recommending that we do it this way instead of maybe distributing it to get most critical first?
Council member, the landscaping, which is maybe one of the elements you're talking about, is relatively not a large amount of the overall budget. One of the critical pieces that is included in this budget request is the glass wall, which is really important for safety. As you may know, there have been successful suicides off of the top of that structure, and so what we are requesting is what would be required to be able to open it to the public. If it was not approved, we would prioritize waterproofing, finalizing waterproofing. We wouldn't be able to open it up to the public.
Okay.
Great question, thank you. So as far as the funding sources, the reallocations that we're proposing from previously approved projects include postponing development of bilingual signage, working a portion of some remodeling on our first floor into future facilities plans, postponing a service desk replacement, and reducing door replacements. Next slide, please. Also, some savings in the current fiscal year budget for fire system maintenance, and then some savings from a project that was completed at the Anderson Foothill Library. So those total there, of course, the $157,000. Next slide, please. As been mentioned, along with the $157,000, we are proposing use of $1,164,215 from the library's fund balance, and those combined will total $1,321,215. That will bring the library's fund balance, as been indicated, to approximately 15% of annual revenues. Next slide, please.
So you may have seen in the news, your Salt Lake City Public Library was recently recognized as one of the most popular, 15 most popular libraries in the world, based on Google reviews, Wikipedia page views, TikTok and Instagram posts. And there were several comments on those that did note, in particular, access to the roof being a really important priority for the community. So we take that very seriously. Our locations are a very significant part of the value that we provide to the community, and would just love to share with you all just a few additional renderings of the roof renovation, really as we take pride in this space that we do believe is important, public, welcoming space. And next slide, please. Also space that's accessible for everyone. Next slide. Space that's dynamic, as those of you who have had a chance to tour, space that we foresee being used for a variety of different purposes by our patrons, and by the public at large. Next slide. A space that's reflective, a space that people can actually just be and contemplate. Next slide. And a space that really celebrates the natural life and interaction of both city and the incredible view that it offers. And lastly, an inspiring space. Next slide. A space that we can all be proud of as an important public asset for our city. So again, we thank you all for the opportunity to present this and welcome any questions, additional questions you have.
Thank you, Councilwoman Young.
Yeah, so I do appreciate the questions about cost and where we're spending our money. I will just say my personal reflection on this is a couple items related to the budgeting. When I look at this design, it looks very sustainable and durable over time. You don't have a lot of items that are going to need to be replaced regularly. I look at this a lot through the lens of items that are used in schools and trying to make sure that we're building into the environment. So by utilizing things like concrete, to be able to create benches as opposed to necessarily buying, a whole set of benches. Those types of things I think are very cost effective, and I like that you've done that. The second thing I'll just note is that when looking at the design and even kind of walking it today, it is very limited, and I like that. Like, I don't think you need a lot of, bells and whistles up there, and the fact that you're letting the landscape speak for itself. Because when you're up there, you have the opportunity to look out over the city, to see downtown, to see the mountains. And I do think that you've prioritized the money going into safety features, which I just think is going to be a key concern, because there's no reason to have like this beautiful opportunity and space, but then to say to the public, I'm sorry, it's not accessible regularly, or you have to reserve a time or something like that. The last thing I'll just clarify, because it was a question I had, there are blue sections located there. That is not a pool. That is not any sort of water feature. But instead is really just something for, more of that, I'm trying to think, it's more, a playground kind of matting or padding that allows kids to be able to play safely. And so I really do appreciate all of those elements and how they fit together, and think that the way that you've structured the budget coming out of the general fund as well as the reappropriation, well done.
Thank you. Council, any other? Councilmember Romano?
I'll just say thanks for the tour the other day. I'm excited for this to be reopened. Salt Lake City has two really beautiful rooftop decks, both of which are closed to the public. The other one's on top of the LDS Conference Center. Both really stunning views and amazing spaces, and it's been sad for over a decade for both of them. I think that they've been closed, and so I'm glad that we're going to open the one that is in our control.
I don't get my tour till tomorrow, so anything that has universal design, I really love. I love that it is not an accommodation, but we are considering people as part of it. So thank you for all of those elements. And I'm just going to say that this is one of those unfortunate projects that ran into possibly every calamity, including COVID, leadership transition, increasing material costs and scarcity, labor price increases. So we're going to go ahead and just do what needs to be done to muscle through to the end. And I'm really optimistic that the new leadership here is going to stabilize us, and future projects will just be the smoothest sailing we could imagine. So thank you for your hard work in trying to finish this up for us.
Thank you, Council.
All right. Tony and Heather, I'm going to apologize to you because our food has actually been delivered for an hour. So what I would like to do is enter into closed session, eat dinner while we do closed session, and then when we return, finish up with our CDBG conversations to finish the meeting. Does that work for everyone? Okay, so then can I get We are going to go into closed session for a strategy session to discuss the purchase, exchange, or lease of real property, including any form of water rights or water shares, and attorney-client matters. Can I get a motion for that, please?
Okay, Madam Chair, I move that we enter closed session for the purposes of discussing purchase, sale, or lease of real property. Purchase, sale, disposition, or lease. Yeah, give me that. Purchase, exchange, or lease of real property, including any form of water rights or water shares, and attorney-client matters.
Second.
I've got a motion from Councilmember Mono, a second from Councilmember Young. Roll call. Dugan?
Yes.
Lopez Chavez?
Yes.
Wharton?
Yes.
Pui?
Yes.
Mono?
Yes.
Young?
Aye.
And I'm a yes. That's unanimous. Can we take, please, just 5 minutes to get dinner and then reconvene, please? We will go to our final item for the day. We'll welcome Ben Ludke up to the table, and we will go through, oh, do we need Tony and Heather as well? We'll go through the fiscal year 24-25 funding allocations for one-year action plan for community development block grant and other federal grant follow-up.
Does everybody have an updated funding log? You know it's the right one. In the lower left, it says March 14th. Not the one pager, the big one. Yes. A reminder, the council held and closed the public hearing on March 5th. From the first briefing, there are 3 unresolved issues. The first is there are different recommendations for CDBG housing for Fix the Bricks, which was recommended to be funded by the advisory board, and the mayor recommended to instead fund the community land trust. The second unresolved issue is the County Housing Authority's rental assistance application for HOPWA. At the public hearing, the director spoke and said that at the recommended funding level, they would not have enough money to keep all of the tenants that currently rely on that program housed. The third issue that's unresolved is the $287,000 of one-time money related to the pandemic. And the council had talked about taking all $287,000 and using it in the CDBG public services category. I can walk through each of those 3 unresolved issues in that order, if that works. Okay. For the Fix the Bricks, this is number 6 in CDBG housing. The council discussed at the last briefing that Fix the Bricks would have a greater number of beneficiaries at the $220,000 funding level. This would be about 10 homes that would receive the seismic retrofits. Whereas the Community Land Trust, also called Shared Equity Program, the $220,000 would be enough leveraging other funding for a single home to be added to the Community Land Trust. The primary challenges for Fix the Bricks are the program staffing and a lack of specialized contractors who are able to actually do the seismic retrofits. The CDBG funding does have a small amount for administrative costs, but there are federal limitations on using CDBG funding to cover just the program staffing for the FEMA-funded portion, which is the primary funding for the program. So the question is, does the council want to shift the funding and do Fix the Bricks or the Community Land Trust?
Council? Anyone want
I would like to start. I know Fix the Bricks program is very important in my district, in particular in communities that own their household but have aged. There's a lot of individuals that would help. We've also heard in some of the meetings as I've gone through in these programs, we have a huge backlog and can make a huge impact. I know this is in particular important in the West Side communities as well, but I would be in favor of that. We've funded the Community Land Trust. I just think it's more expansive and it helps us pursue and protect and preserve those long-term housing units that we need.
Anyone else?
So you're in favor of Fix the Bricks? Okay. So,
All right, it looks like Fix the Bricks wins.
okay. The second unresolved issue, this is HOPWA. And it is HOPWA number 1, the County Housing Authority Tenant-Based Rental Assistance. At the public hearing, the director said that at the $550,000, or that a minimum of $550,000 would be needed to continue providing rental assistance to the 57 households that are currently reliant upon the program. That is $27,777.
Can you tell us which page?
Yeah. So HOPWA is on page page 13. And this is the very first application on page 13. So you'll see that in the middle column, requested recommended funding, the board and the mayor recommended $522,223. The director of the County Housing Authority said that they need $27,000 more than that. They need $550,000 in order to keep all 57 households housed. This information was not previously disclosed, so when the advisory board and the mayor were making their funding recommendations, they didn't know that that was a minimum funding amount that was needed. So this raises a policy question about how the process could be changed in future years in order to have eviction prevention minimum funding levels disclosed sooner. Eviction prevention is one of the key strategies in the city's anti-displacement efforts, and so it could be extended across all of your funding sources, including HUD grants. So the question before the council is, do you want to try to find that additional $27,000 and change to meet the $550,000 minimum? And then if you do, there are 3 funding scenarios in the staff report that I can go through.
Are we committing, when we accept these applications, to funding entire programs? That's a pretty rare practice in grant making, that anyone is willing to fund entire programs. Usually they want to see who else is funding because they want to be part of a team.
So good question. So this actually comes about because it's only the state of Utah and then the Salt Lake City that receives federal HOPWA funding. And so because of that, they've customized it over the years to basically make these long-term tenant-based rental vouchers to then get people in, keep them housed long-term. So it is unique in that sense, just because the funding's unique. It's a very special targeted population that they've customized it over the years into the program that it currently is.
In regards to the funding scenarios, so I guess my concern is, in the same way it has come to light that they have a threshold, in any of the additional scenarios, do we know if that impacts any of the other program thresholds as well?
Unless,
We do not. That's
No.
not a question that we pose to the agencies, and they didn't show up to speak to that at the public hearing.
Yeah, so I guess that would just be like a general concern. I'm not opposed to like moving it forward, but I do worry about the fact that we have this additional layer of information for one proposal that we do not have for the other proposals to be able to then say, well, let's pull a little from each of the others.
the 3 other applications, one of them does include rental assistance. And so to your point, it could have the same minimum funding need that hasn't been checked. The other 2 are not rental assistance. But the other 2, they're relatively new mental health services, and it's matching the funding level that they were awarded last year to continue providing the service. That was the reason for the funding scenario.
What's our third option?
Yeah, so that's what I'm getting to. The third option is looking at other funding sources for rental assistance that the city already has budgeted this fiscal year.
So I will say as one, I would be interested in knowing what those solutions could look like, especially related to what appears to be a potential solution of $27,000. Like, what is possible to be able to not have somebody lose this solution?
Yeah.
Is it just me? That's fine. Okay. Oh, we've got another.
So wanting to explore other existing rental assistance funding options, and we would come back to the council.
Yeah, and I guess I would be hopeful because it is such, I mean, relatively compared to some of these awards, a small amount, that it could be something that we have available through another program.
Okay.
Yeah, would any of the other CDBG funding mechanisms qualify, or would they have to apply for us to move that funding?
The ones that I had included in the staff report where there's annual funding through Funding Our Future for rental assistance. I don't know if that's all already been awarded. It might have. The other one is $272,000. This was a placeholder in the annual budget for a tenant relocation, rental assistance, and service navigation. I don't know the status of those funds. And then I learned after this was published last week that there was ARPA funding that the council awarded as community grants, and one of those, $100,000, is unable to be used. So that would be coming back to the council for a discussion. I do believe rental assistance would be an eligible use, but we would want to double check that.
Okay.
So
I would love if staff could explore that, so by the time we receive the ARPA funding again, we could release it if possible for this program and make up for that deficit.
Okay.
Funding, right? Or wait.
Yeah, it's
a return.
Yeah.
I wish we'd received more ARPA funding.
Yeah,
Let me put it on the record.
Yeah, if only. Okay, so we'll look into those options in return. The last unresolved issue is using the $287,000 of one-time pandemic-related funding for the public services category. And you can turn to page 15 of the funding log. So I took the 29 applications for CDBG public services and I added them into this section. So what you'll see after the first column where it's the number, then the applicant's name, then the project description, in the middle column, you'll see the regular CDBG recommended and requested funding. Next to that is the CDBG CV, stands for COVID, so the one-time pandemic money. That's the $287,000. And then the column next to that is where we would add the two together. So this is a unique opportunity
to have more funding available for the public services category, we still have to have a minimum of $30,000 to an application, but that $30,000 can be from the regular CDBG and the one-time CDBG, as long as the total is at least $30,000. Based on your discussion at the March 5th briefing, my understanding is you wanted to spread the peanut butter as far as it could possibly go. So there's a scenario that does just that. So in the staff report, it is funding scenario A. It is on page 3, and it's actually called the most peanut butter spread. And this takes 9 applications that are eligible. So Housing Stability has checked to make sure that their program is eligible and they can use the additional funding. Those 9 applications would each receive $30,000. These are 9 applications that are not receiving funding unless you choose to shift funding or add this one-time pandemic funding. So if you do want to move forward with those 9, and this includes the 4 that were flagged as priorities by the council at the last briefing. So this is number 2, the Boys and Girls Club, their Behavioral Health Resiliency Program. Number 6, the Children's Media Workshop. Number 7 is Housing Counseling by Community Development Corporation of Utah. Number 10 and 11, these are both Switchpoint. It's their facilities out by the airport. They would both be supportive case management. Then Salt Lake American, number 16, the survival skills for refugees. Number 23, the United Way, basic needs of Salt Lake City residents. Number 25, the Wasatch Community Gardens Green Team. And number 27, the YWCA Domestic Violence Residential Services. So $30,000 to each of those 9, which leaves a remaining balance of almost $18,000. That's not enough to meet the $30,000 minimum to give to another applicant. So instead, the proposal is to evenly spread those to 6 other applications. And this was based on how they ranked in the scores, rounding to $1,000 when possible, which is a best practice, and only funding them up to the maximum. So it's small, but it's an additional $3,000 for number 14 Odyssey House bus passes, an additional $3,000 for number 15, also Odyssey House, but this is transitional housing. It would be $3,000 for both of the road homes, number 21 and 22. It's the Miller Homeless Resource Center, and then they have housing staffing that goes to multiple of the resource centers. It's also $3,000 to the 4th Street Clinic, and then the remainder, which is $2,700, would be for the in-between, and that's because they scored the lowest out of those 6. So I know that was a lot of detail.
Can I make an alternative suggestion for that 17,000 and change?
Sure.
The Boys and Girls Club request is for youth mental health, which is massive, and the request was for 116,000. So we're getting nowhere close anyway to, can we just give them 47,752?
I mean, I will argue that the opposite of that, though. We have a scoring system, and we have the system has highlighted who's supposed to receive more funding.
You know that I
going away from that, but then on top of that, we are actually giving them more.
You know that those rating systems are kind of arbitrary, and things like if you have a good grant writer can sway it as opposed to contribution to community. But I respect if that's the decision we make.
I mean, I think spreading it again, I think it is a good, just to set some evenness to the whole system. I think that's less weighted. If we want to just if we want to spread the peanut butter, let's spread the peanut butter then, if that's the strategy. Ultimately, I seem like I understand that what some of you want to accomplish with this, and if we're going to spread it, let's just spread it.
sorry, to go back to the super strained analogy, and this is where like I need your help, is that like I only want to spread it as far as we can and still have it be like a sandwich, because there isn't, while I know that the need is great, like there is an amount that at one point that if you get, it almost is so low it almost causes problems because it's not adequate to serve, and instead you're advertising and telling people that you can do something that maybe you can't actually do. I mean, there's a point where the integrity is gone. So, and that's what I don't know enough about each individual program on this sheet to know when we've reached that point. And that's what I'm trying to get at with my question. So that it's not so much that I'm relying on the committee and just the ranking, but like you all have read all of these things, and you know what these programs require, and you know how far you can spread a dollar before it becomes meaningless. To help me understand that. Where are we at that point?
On some of the applications, that specific question was asked. On the council's priority applications, for example, the Boys and Girls Club, we asked, would $30,000 be enough to use? And they confirmed, yes, it would be. And when looking at their budget narrative, the smallest component, it was a little more. It was $32,000 for a licensed therapist, 30 hours a week. So maybe they're making up that $2,000 from another source. So that has been looked at. I think this also gets to the larger question of, is 30,000 the right minimum? And that could be looked at as part of updating the 5-year plan, since this is the last year under it.
Sorry, hold on. That, when you're saying that has been accounted for, is that accounted for in what's on the screen right there?
All 9.
I also...
In the 9, this scenario.
I know we did it for the council's priority 4, and I went and looked at the budget narrative for the other 5. If you want us to go back and double check, we can do that extra step.
I think there's also a question of, are we actually making sandwiches or are we giving peanut butter? Typically speaking, nonprofits will apply to multiple agencies as part of the application process. Usually you even have to prove that you've asked other places for money. So, I mean, I think it's valid, right? Are we giving a significant enough amount of peanut butter to contribute to a sandwich? But I don't know that we're making sandwiches.
Okay. And I appreciate you extending the analogy. But I also, like, do you understand my question though? Like,
yeah, you want to make sure that if we give the money that it's going to be functional towards whatever goal is stated in the application.
Yes.
And that we're not overly diluting and trying to give to 5 applications where the money won't be powerful if we could give to 3 and retain some power.
Yes. And even though, like I've been on the board of nonprofits before and applied to multiple places, and you try to cobble together a peanut butter sandwich. Right. But you don't know if those other pieces are gonna land, and if you only get like.
No, that's why our best practice is to ask for 4 times the amount that we need.
Yeah.
Any good development professional will do that.
Okay. Well, I would like, if you could, if it's not going to take too much time, I would like you to double check that, because I really don't want to. If it's something that they can't really cobble it together, it's not going to make a meaningful impact, or by putting that somewhere else, then that's what I want to do.
Okay. We can double check that. If they all say yep, we can use the $30,000. We can email an update. If not, I think we would come back for another briefing.
Sure.
That's a good question, though. Is there a scenario where a nonprofit will say, I mean, I'm talking to you, Victoria, since you've been on the other side. Is there a scenario where a nonprofit will say, no, don't give me the $30,000?
It depends on the nonprofit. Most of the time, like, we don't understand that we as a culture are living on the largesse of nonprofits who have people who work for them who are motivated by the mission, and they will make whatever we give them do more work than it rationally should. I have never turned down one, but I have probably asked staff to do irrational things to make that amount work. Or I've leveraged it. I've gone to other funders and said, we got this, now I need you to match it. So I mean, there's any number of things.
But it could happen. I guess.
It is a possibility. I don't think it's a likelihood. Yes.
Oh, thanks, Madam Chair. So you said this already, Ben, and I'm trying to follow through, but there's 9 that were not recommended for any funding, but were eligible. And these are the 9 that are there. But I'm seeing some here that don't have recommendation for funding, but don't say that they're ineligible. Is that because they're recommended in a different category, or do you want me to give you specifics?
Yeah, give me an example.
Okay. So I think like 21 and 22. And
so if
20, 21, and 22.
So if the column of CDBG CV funding, if it's just white, that means they're eligible.
CDBG CV. Okay. Yeah, so like number 20, the in between 21 road home, 21 road home, those ones are white columns.
Yep, they are eligible.
But I don't see them on your list of like spreading the peanut butter to them.
So they are recommended to already receive regular CDBG funding.
In a different category.
The 9 that are in the scenario, they are neither recommended to receive the regular CDBG funding nor the one-time pandemic funding.
Looking at the wrong section of this. Okay, thanks. I'll trust you. I'll keep looking through that.
The recommendation is under mayor, not under council yet, because we haven't confirmed what we're getting.
Is it possible to get page 2 of the staff report up on the screen? So let me give you an example. This is a table in the staff report. So number 2, Boys and Girls Club. It is highlighted green because it is eligible for the one-time pandemic funding. And it has yes, saying that it is eligible. But it has a 0 for the regular CDBG funding. So I went down this color-coded table, and if there was an application that is green, so it's eligible, but it's not recommended for the regular CDBG funding, then I added it to the scenario, and that's how I got the 9. And this is spreading the peanut butter further because all 9 are not recommended for funding from the regular money. So taking the pandemic money and using it for those 9 that have no funding recommendation makes 9 more that would receive minimum funding. Under this scenario, there are only 3 applications that would receive no funding. Those are number 12, the International Rescue Committee. That's because they haven't responded and we don't know if they're eligible. The other 2 are at the very bottom, number 28. They are ineligible. They were disqualified. HUD regulations do not allow them to receive any CDBG funding. And then the last one, 29, they were disqualified from the regular CDBG funding because unfortunately they applied to the wrong grant. They have received funding most years for at least a decade. And we just heard, I think it was this afternoon, that they are eligible for the pandemic funding. So that is the one change since this came out. They don't have a score because they were disqualified under the regular CDBG process. So since I was using the scores as a guide they didn't have a score and they were disqualified. So 26 applications in public services would receive funding under this scenario. Of the remaining 3, 1 is ineligible, another is non-responsive, so we don't know if they're eligible, and the other one we just found out a few hours ago that they are eligible, but they were disqualified earlier because they applied to the wrong grant.
So back to the question from I think Chris's side of the house, or my side now, is just we have this 17,000. The one option was we give it to the Boys and Girls Clubs, or we spread it amongst a number of them at $3,000, right? But can they use them at $3,000? Yes or no, we're not quite sure yet. Some of them may, maybe not, and maybe will the Boys and Girls Club really be able to use that 18 or 17 grand, and the benefit of those two. We're spending a lot of money on this thing here, and everyone, so I think we just need to have that answered. It's my position here, because I would just give it to the Boys and Girls Club, make it a clean go, because the others 6 are already getting their 30,000 at minimum. Give it to the Boys and Girls Club, because we know they could use that for that program and the mental health side of house. That's just my take. We could call a bunch of people up and ask these 9 people or 6 people about $3,000, or we could say, okay, the Boys and Girls Clubs get another X 17. These other 3, they're already getting 30, and they can do fit. So, and I understand I kind of hear everybody's comments here, and this is a little bit more than just fireworks, but we've spent like hours on $25,000 on fireworks. This is a little bit bigger than a fireworks, because this is people's health and well-being, but it's still going to go to a good place. And so let's give it to the Boys and Girls Club, call it a day, because everybody else is still getting a lot of money, and we're also grateful that we got this $287,000, because we got 9 more programs that are getting funding. So I love it. So that's where I stand. That's my straw poll. Sure. The straw poll is that we give the 17,752 to the Boys and Girls Club, and call it a day.
So the other allocation as listed, the 9 additional orgs get the 30,000, and then you're saying that all 17 goes to Boys and Girls Club.
So, yeah. Wouldn't that contradict with your interest of knowing before the spreading of the peanut butter? That's not what I originally started, but the conversation started, let's spread the peanut butter, and I was like, sure, let's spread the peanut butter. I'm okay with giving it to them. I felt like we're going way outside the strategy of why do we have this scoring system if we're not going to follow it? I mean, sincerely, why, if this is just unimportant to us, why do we even have it? Why do we put people in rooms to give us a scoring system and to go through all of this, and then we're just going to not even follow it whatsoever? So I think that is my point.
Very good point, but I look at all these 9 groups that we're just giving money to, they're all in the bottom portion of it here.
Yeah, except it's 280,000. It was not contemplated as part of the pot that they divvied up.
And this Boys and Girls Club is in the middle of this group between a very tight band of funding, and that's so.
I'm okay. I just want to make sure that
in this conceptualization, we haven't taken anything away from their recommendations. It's adding.
Remember ourselves when we are scoring in the future. I'm okay with that. I believe in their mission. I believe in all these organizations' mission. I also want to make sure that we are not setting aside our personal, because I can go start picking up my organizations in there and say, okay, they need to get more money than yours. And I just want to make sure that we are following some sort of rubric, so then we shield ourselves from scrutiny on that. Good.
But correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, in this conceptualization, with the addition of this $287,752, we're actually taking nothing away from any of the organizations that were adjudicated by the review committee. We are just adding to the pot and spreading around the ones that were left out.
Correct. Under the scenario, you would take the board and the mayor's funding recommendations, agree to them, and then on top of that, you add the one-time pandemic money.
I want to make super duper clear though, when we award this, this additional money, because, you know, we had this happen before with some of the, not with pandemic funds, but where we awarded for a couple of years CDBG to an organization, and then all of a sudden we couldn't anymore. And it was like a big part of their budget, and then we had to do like a general fund allocation to save one particular organization that we all really pulled at the heartstring. I'm not crying. You're crying. So can we really emphasize that this is like COVID money and it's not coming back?
I think that's something the administration would be able to communicate to the applicants.
I will say that was communicated as part of our initial line of questioning about this additional 287,000, is that there was one-time recaptured COVID dollars, and we would like to know if they were A, eligible, and B, interested. So that was part of the original conversation. We will, of course, follow up and make sure that that is understood on the other side as well.
Okay, have we voted on the straw poll? Dan's straw poll is for the 9 additional at 30 and the additional 17,752 to go to the Boys and Girls Club. All right, Chris isn't here, but we're gonna make him a affirmative so that. Chris, are you good with the straw poll? Yes. He's good with the straw poll.
So it's unanimous.
Yes. Okay.
We will come back for the one unresolved issue of the HOPWA funding for the rental assistance and see if there are other existing funds available. So the council is scheduled to vote on April 9th, so we have a little time to figure that out.
Thank you. Council, we'll stand adjourned.